Welcome to the Echo of Dream Lab, before we settle into the deep, ancient history of our planet. If you find peace in these echoes, we invite you to join our laboratory by subscribing. Your presence helps our journey continue. Now, let the world of today dissolve. Close your eyes and breathe slowly. We are traveling back, past the cities, past the empires, past the very first human breath. We are entering a world that breathed a different air, a world of giants. Tonight, we trace the footprints of those who ruled for 165 million years. From the first, humble pulse of life in the Triassic, to the final, long shadow of the Cretaceous, the giants are gone, but their echoes remain. Let the science soothe you. Let the ancient past become your sanctuary. Let us begin. The rise and fall of dinosaurs, from humble beginnings to planetary dominance, the greatest story ever told. Imagine a world where giants walked the earth, creatures so massive, so powerful, so utterly alien to our modern experience, that they seem like fantasy, like something from a dream or a nightmare. But they were real. They lived, they breathed, they hunted, they reproduced, they ruled, for over 160 million years. This is the story of the dinosaurs. A tale that spans from their mysterious origins, in the aftermath of catastrophe, through their spectacular rise to dominance over every terrestrial ecosystem on the planet, to their catastrophic extinction in fire and darkness. It is a story written in stone, decoded by scientists working in laboratories and museums around the world, and it reveals one of the most extraordinary chapters, perhaps the most extraordinary chapter, in the history of life on our planet. To truly understand this story, we must think in terms that challenge human intuition. We must contemplate deep time, millions of years, tens of millions of years, hundreds of millions of years. Spans of time so vast that they dwarf all of recorded human history. We must imagine continents in different positions, climates utterly unlike today, ecosystems with no modern equivalent. This is not easy. Our brains evolved to think in days, months, years, decades, at most. Not millions of years. But that is the scale we must embrace. To understand the dinosaurs, Chapter 1, The World Before Dinosaurs. To understand the dinosaurs, we must first journey back, way back, to a time before they existed, to a world that was ending, and a world about to be born. We must travel to the boundary between the Permian and Triassic periods. 252 million years ago. This was not a good time to be alive. In fact, it was arguably the worst time to be alive in the entire history of complex life on Earth. Our planet was experiencing its darkest hour. The Permian Triassic extinction event, known to scientists as the Great Dying. This wasn't just any extinction. This was the most devastating catastrophe in the history of life on Earth. Nothing before or since has come close to its magnitude. Let me give you numbers that are almost impossible to comprehend. 96%. Think about that number for a moment. 96% of all marine species vanished. Gone. Forever. Families that had existed for hundreds of millions of years. Lineages that had survived previous mass extinctions. Wiped out. Erased from existence. On land, the situation was equally catastrophic. 70% of terrestrial, vertebrate species went extinct. Forests collapsed. Food webs disintegrated, the very fabric of life on Earth unraveled. The oceans turned toxic, becoming hostile to almost all life. The atmosphere became poisonous, filled with carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide. The temperature soared. In some estimates, global temperatures increased by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, turning much of the planet into an uninhabitable hellscape. The exact cause remains one of the great scientific mysteries. Though we have strong hypotheses. Some scientists point to massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia. The Siberian traps. These weren't ordinary volcanic eruptions, these were flood basalts. Unimaginable quantities of lava pouring out over hundreds of thousands of years. Covering an area the size of Europe. Several kilometers thick in places, these eruptions released enormous quantities of greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide. Methane. Sulfur dioxide. The climate went haywire. Temperatures fluctuated wildly. Ocean chemistry changed. Becoming more acidic, less oxygenated. The entire planet was thrown into environmental chaos, but volcanism might not have been the only culprit. Some scientists suggest asteroid impacts, perhaps multiple impacts, contributed to the catastrophe. Others point to methane release from ocean depths. Massive quantities of methane hydrate, frozen methane trapped in ocean sediments, suddenly released as temperatures warmed, creating a runaway greenhouse effect, or perhaps, most likely, it was a terrible combination of all these factors. A perfect storm of catastrophes. Volcanism triggering climate change. Climate change releasing methane. Methane causing more warming. More warming causing more methane release. A cascade of disasters, each feeding into the next, amplifying, accelerating, until the entire system collapsed. Whatever the cause or causes, life on Earth came perilously close to complete annihilation. If the extinction had been slightly more severe, if a few more species had disappeared, the evolutionary tree of life might have been pruned back so far. That complex life might never have recovered. Earth might have become a planet of microbes. Forever, but life, as we know, as we've learned from studying Earth's history, is remarkably resilient, tenacious, persistent, even in the face of unimaginable catastrophe. Even when pushed to the very brink of extinction, some organisms survive. Some lineages persist. And from these survivors, life rebuilds. From the ashes of the great dying, new forms began to emerge. This was the dawn of the Triassic period, approximately 252 million years ago. A time of recovery, yes, but also a time of opportunity. A time of innovation. A time when the ancestors of dinosaurs first appeared on the world stage. Small, insignificant, easily overlooked, but carrying within them the potential for greatness. Chapter 2, The Triassic World, a Time of Transition. Picture the early Triassic Earth. Close your eyes and try to imagine it. The landscape would seem alien. Wrong somehow. Because the continents were not where they are today. Not even close. A single supercontinent called Pangaea dominated the planet. All the world's land masses. Everything that would become North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia, Antarctica, all joined together, forming one massive continent, stretching from pole to pole. From the northern Arctic to the southern Antarctic, this changed everything. Climate patterns, ocean currents, atmospheric circulation, the very nature of life itself. Because when you have one giant continent, you don't have the same climatic buffering that separate continents provide. You get extremes. Harsh extremes. The climate was brutal. Hot. Dry. With intense seasonal variations. The interior of Pangaea, thousands of miles from any ocean, was a vast desert, the Pangaean Desert. Perhaps the largest desert in Earth's history. Stretching endlessly, receiving almost no rainfall, temperatures soaring during the day, plummeting at night. Few organisms could survive there. The coasts were different, better, but still harsh. They received torrential, seasonal rains, monsoons of incredible intensity. When the seasonal winds shifted, bringing moisture from the ocean, the rains came, flooding, eroding, creating brief periods of abundance. But then, the dry season would return, and the coastlands would bake under a merciless sun. This was not a gentle world. This was not a stable world. This was a harsh, testing ground for evolution. Only the tough survived. Only the adaptable thrived. And slowly, very slowly, life recovered from the great dying.
The climate was brutal, hot, dry, with intense seasonal variations. The interior of Pangaea, thousands of miles from any ocean, was a vast desert. The Pangaean Desert, perhaps the largest desert in Earth's history, stretching endlessly, receiving almost no rainfall, temperatures soaring during the day, plummeting at night. Few organisms could survive there. The coasts were different, better, but still harsh. They received torrential seasonal rains, monsoons of incredible intensity. When the seasonal winds shifted, bringing moisture from the ocean, the rains came, flooding, eroding, creating brief periods of abundance. But then, the dry season would return, and the coastlands would bake under a merciless sun. This was not a gentle world. This was not a stable world. This was a harsh testing ground for evolution. Only the tough survived. Only the adaptable thrived. And slowly, very slowly, life recovered from the great dying. The climate was brutal, hot, dry, with intense seasonal variations. The interior of Pangaea, thousands of miles from any ocean, was a vast desert. The Pangaean Desert, perhaps the largest desert in Earth's history, stretching endlessly, receiving almost no rainfall, temperatures soaring during the day, plummeting at night. Few organisms could survive there. The coasts were different, better, but still harsh. They received torrential seasonal rains, monsoons of incredible intensity. When the seasonal winds shifted, bringing moisture from the ocean, the rains came, flooding, eroding, creating brief periods of abundance. But then, the dry season would return, and the coastlands would bake under an merciless sun. This was not a gentle world. This was not a stable world. This was a harsh testing ground for evolution. Only the tough survived. Only the adaptable thrived. And slowly, very slowly, life recovered from the great dying. Who ruled this world? Not dinosaurs. Not yet. They hadn't evolved yet. Or, if they had, they were so rare and insignificant that we haven't found their fossils. Instead, the dominant land animals were the synapsids, the so-called mammal-like reptiles. Though that term is somewhat misleading, these weren't reptiles trying to be mammals. These were their own distinct group, with their own evolutionary trajectory. Creatures like Lystrosaurus appeared everywhere. This pig-sized herbivore, stocky, with a barrel-shaped body and a turtle-like beak, had somehow survived the great dying, perhaps by burrowing, perhaps by estivating, entering a dormant state during the worst periods. However it survived, Lystrosaurus was incredibly successful in the aftermath, making up as much as 95% of terrestrial vertebrate fossils in some early Triassic formations. Think about that, 95%. In some locations, if you looked around, 9 out of every 10 animals you saw would be Lystrosaurus. This suggests an ecosystem still recovering still rebuilding diversity. When one species dominates so completely, it indicates an ecosystem under stress. Simplified, not yet complex, but other synapsids existed too. Cynodonts, advanced synapsids that would eventually give rise to mammals. They were small, mostly, with specialized teeth, possibly fur, possibly even some degree of warm-bloodedness. They were survivors, adaptable, tough, and they would play an important role in Mesozoic ecosystems. Even after dinosaurs rose to dominance, the vegetation was different too, profoundly different from today. No grasses. Those wouldn't evolve for another 150 million years. Grasses are actually quite recent, evolutionarily speaking. Instead, the landscape was dominated by conifers, relatives of modern pines and firs. Ferns, filling the understory, seed ferns, a now extinct group called Pteridospermatopsids. These plants looked like ferns, but reproduced with seeds rather than spores. They were common, successful, filling niches that flowering plants would later occupy. The forests were dense in some areas, sparse in others, but everywhere they would seem strange, alien, to our modern eyes. The shapes were wrong, the colors perhaps different. The very structure of the ecosystems unfamiliar. This was not our world. This was Earth, but Earth in a different configuration, operating under different rules. And in this strange world, a new group was emerging, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. The archosaurs, the ruling reptiles. This group would eventually include dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and the ancestors of modern crocodiles. In the early Triassic, they were small, insignificant, outnumbered by synapsids, outcompeted in many niches. But they were there, evolving, adapting, waiting for their moment. The memoirs origams of das US. When did dinosaurs first appear? This is one of the most fundamental questions in paleontology. And surprisingly, the answer keeps changing. Every few years, new discoveries push the origin earlier or later, or complicate the picture in new ways. For decades, scientists believed that dinosaurs originated in the late Triassic, around 230 million years ago. The oldest definitive dinosaur fossils, found in places like the Ischigualasto Formation in Argentina and the Santa Maria Formation in Brazil, date to approximately this time, about 230 to 235 million years ago. Creatures like Eoraptor, Dawn Thief, a small, lightly built bipedal predator, about the size of a large dog, with a mixture of primitive and advanced. But here's the problem, and this is a problem that paleontologists face constantly. When we find the first definitive dinosaur fossils at 230 million years ago, they're already recognizably dinosaurs. They already have the characteristic features, the upright posture, with legs positioned directly beneath the body rather than sprawling out to the sides. The specialized hip structure, either the lizard-hipped Sauristian configuration or the bird-hipped Ornithischian configuration. The reduced fourth and fifth digits on the hand. The specialized ankle joint. These features didn't appear overnight. They evolved gradually over millions of years through a series of intermediate forms. This means, logically, dinosaurs must have had a longer evolutionary history, one that we haven't yet discovered, either because the fossils haven't been found, or because they existed in environments where fossilization was unlikely, or because we're looking in the wrong places. Where did they come from? What were their ancestors? Recent research, combining fossil evidence with phylogenetic analysis and biogeographic modeling, suggests something surprising. The earliest dinosaurs might have, and this is where it gets interesting. Footprints tell a different story. Trace fossils, the tracks and trails left by ancient organisms, sometimes preserve evidence that body fossils don't on. In Poland, in the Holy Cross Mountains, researchers discovered dinosaur-like footprints called Pterodactylus. These tracks, found in rocks of the early Olenekian age, date to approximately 249 to 251 million years ago. Just a few million years after the Great Dying, just a few million years into the Triassic period. This suggests that dinosaurs, or at least their immediate ancestors, were present much earlier than the body fossils indicate. Perhaps they originated in the immediate aftermath of the Permian Triassic extinction. Perhaps they were one of the groups that emerged as ecosystems recovered, originated in western, low-latitude Gondwana, what is today Equatorial Africa and South America. Specifically, perhaps in what is now Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Zambia, the southern cone of South America. This would have been a hot, arid environment, much different from what scientists previously assumed. For years, the conventional wisdom was that dinosaurs originated in temperate regions, perhaps in southern South America, but the evidence increasingly suggests a tropical origin. In the hot, seasonal environments of low-latitude Gondwana. From this origin point, dinosaurs spread, dispersing across Pangaea, taking advantage of the connected landmass, moving into different environments, adapting to different conditions, diversifying. By the late Triassic, by 230 million years ago, dinosaurs had reached what would become North America, Europe, India. They were widespread, but still rare, still a minor component of ecosystems. But here's what's crucial to understand. What's essential to grasp. The first dinosaurs were not impressive. They were not the giants we imagine when we think dinosaur. They were small, about the size of chickens, or at most, medium-sized dogs. The largest early dinosaurs, like Herrerasaurus, reached lengths of perhaps 3 to 5 meters. But most were much smaller. They were rare, making up only a tiny fraction of the animals in their ecosystems, perhaps 1 to 2% of individuals in fossil assemblages. They were outnumbered by other archosaurs, by synapsids, by various other reptile groups. They were not dominant, not successful by any obvious measure, just another group, trying to survive, trying to find their niche. They were carnivores or omnivores, swift runners with hollow bones and upright postures that allowed efficient bipedal locomotion. They likely hunted small prey, insects, early mammals, small reptiles. They might have scavenged. They might have eaten plants opportunistically. They were generalists, adaptable, but not specialized, not optimized for any particular lifestyle. They were living in the shadow of their relatives, the pseudosuchians, the crocodile-line archosaurs, ancestors of modern crocodiles, were far more diverse and dominant in the Triassic. Some were small and agile. Others were large and powerful. Some reached lengths of nearly 33 feet. 10 meters, massive predators that dwarfed any dinosaur. Roissochaeans, large, quadrupedal predators with massive heads and powerful jaws, dominated many ecosystems. They were the apex predators, the top of the food chain. Dinosaurs, if they encountered Roissochaeans, would have been prey, not predators. Adverts, heavily armored herbivores covered in bony plates, were common, successful, filling niches that dinosaurs would later occupy. And then there were the pterosaurs, the first vertebrates to achieve powered flight. They owned the skies, soaring overhead, fishing in rivers, hunting insects. They were successful, diverse, thriving. So why do we care about these small, rare, seemingly insignificant creatures? These minor players in Triassic ecosystems, because they were about to inherit the Earth, because they carried within them the potential, the genetic toolkit, the evolutionary flexibility to become the most successful large land animals in Earth's history. But first, they needed an opportunity. They needed the dominant groups to falter, to fail, to disappear, They needed catastrophe. $201 million years ago, the world changed again. Suddenly, violently, catastrophically. The end. Triassic extinction event. The fourth of the Big Five. Mass extinctions in Earth's history. This mass extinction killed approximately 76% of all species, both on land and in the oceans. Entire groups, families that had existed for millions of years, disappeared forever. The cause? Once again, massive volcanic activity. The breakup of Pangaea was beginning. The supercontinent that had existed for hundreds of millions of years was starting to fragment. Rifts were forming, cracks in the Earth's crust, and with these rifts came enormous volcanic eruptions, particularly in what is now the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province. KAMP was one of the largest volcanic events in Earth's history. Eruptions occurred along the rifts that would become the Atlantic Ocean. From what is now Brazil, to West Africa, to Eastern North America, to Southern Europe, an area of approximately 11 million square kilometers was covered in basalt. No, lava flows up to several kilometers thick in places. The volume of magma estimates range from 2 to 6 million cubic kilometers. These eruptions released vast quantities of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. The climate went haywire again, just as it had at the end of the Permian. Temperatures soared. In some estimates, global temperatures increased by 3 to 6 degrees Celsius. Ocean chemistry changed dramatically, becoming more acidic, less oxygenated. Acid rain fell, killing vegetation, poisoning freshwater. The food chains collapsed. Again, for the dominant groups of the Triassic, the large pseudosuchians, the various synapsid groups, the marine reptiles that had finally recovered from the Permian extinction. It was the end. Many groups went completely extinct. Others survived, but were greatly reduced. Their dominance. Their success was over. Marine ecosystems were particularly hard hit. Conodonts, eel-like jawless vertebrates with complex tooth structures, went extinct after existing for 300 million years, surviving 3 previous mass extinctions. They couldn't survive the end. Triassic, many ammonoid groups disappeared. Bivalve mollusks suffered major losses. Corals, already stressed from the Permian extinction, were decimated again, taking millions of years to recover. On land, the large archosaurs were hit hardest. The Rawasuchians, those massive apex predators, went extinct. Every species, every genus, wiped out. The Allosaurs, heavily armored herbivores, gone. Many synapsid groups disappeared. The diversity that had characterized Triassic ecosystems collapsed. But for dinosaurs, this was their moment, their chance, their window of opportunity. Like the survivors of the Permian extinction, dinosaurs found themselves in a world suddenly emptied of competition. A world where the dominant groups had disappeared, where ecological niches were vacant, waiting to be filled. Why did dinosaurs survive when so many others perished? This is one of the great questions in paleontology. And the answer is probably multifaceted, complex, not reducible to a single factor. Perhaps their upright posture gave them an advantage. The way dinosaur legs were positioned directly beneath their bodies, rather than sprawling out to the sides like in most reptiles, allowed for more efficient movement, more efficient breathing. An upright posture means the rib cage isn't compressed during locomotion. Breathing and running can occur simultaneously. This is a significant advantage. Perhaps their relatively small size meant they needed less food. During times of environmental stress, when food is scarce, small animals have an advantage. They can survive on less. They can hide more easily. They can utilize resources that large animals can't access. Perhaps their faster metabolism, if they had one, and this is debated, gave them an edge in the rapidly changing world. Warm-blooded animals or mesothermic animals else can remain active in cool conditions, can forage more hours per day, can respond more quickly to threats and opportunities. Or perhaps, and this is quite possible, it was simply luck, being in the right place at the right time, having just the right combination of features in just the right environments to survive the extinction. Survival through mass extinctions often comes down to chance, to factors we can't easily measure or predict. Whatever the reason or reasons. When the smoke cleared, when the climate stabilized, when ecosystems began to recover, dinosaurs were there, and they were ready to diversify, to expand, to fill the empty world, to begin their rise to dominance. Welcome to the Jurassic period, 201 to 145 million years ago. The world is transforming, changing, becoming more familiar to our modern eyes. Pangaea is breaking apart slowly, gradually, over millions of years, separating into Laurasia in the north and Gondwana in the south, the Tethys Ocean. A vast tropical sea lies between them. The Atlantic Ocean is beginning to form as the Americas separate from Africa and Europe. The climate is becoming warmer, wetter, more hospitable. The extreme aridity of the Triassic is giving way to a more humid climate. Rainfall increases, forests expand, deserts shrink, sea levels rise, creating shallow tropical seas along continental margins. These warm, shallow waters, rich in nutrients, teeming with life, coral reefs expand, marine reptiles flourish, the oceans become more productive, more diverse. Welcome to the Jurassic period, 201 to 145 million years ago. The world is transforming, changing, becoming more familiar to our modern eyes. Pangaea is breaking apart slowly, gradually, over millions of years, separating into Laurasia in the north and Gondwana in the south, the Tethys Ocean. A vast tropical sea lies between them. The Atlantic Ocean is beginning to form. As the Americas separate from Africa and Europe, the climate is becoming warmer, wetter, more hospitable. The extreme aridity of the Triassic is giving way to a more humid climate. Rainfall increases, forests expand, deserts shrink, sea levels rise, creating shallow tropical seas along continental margins. These warm, shallow waters, rich in nutrients, teeming with life, coral reefs expand, marine reptiles flourish, the oceans become more productive, more diverse, and dinosaurs, they explode in diversity, in size, in sheer numbers, in ecological importance. This is their time, their moment. The Jurassic is when dinosaurs truly become the dominant terrestrial vertebrates on Earth, when they fill every major ecological niche, when they evolve forms so diverse, so specialized, so successful, that they will reign supreme for the next 135 million years. The three major groups of dinosaurs diverged and diversified during this time. Actually, they had already diverged earlier, in the late Triassic, but it's during the Jurassic that they really explode in diversity. The ornithischians, the bird-hipped dinosaurs. Though ironically, birds are not descended from this group. They included the future horned dinosaurs, duck-billed dinosaurs, armored dinosaurs. But in the Jurassic, they were represented by early forms like Stegosaurus, the plated dinosaurs, and various small bipedal herbivores, the theropods, the beast-footed dinosaurs, the carnivorous line, bipedal predators ranging from chicken-sized to bus-sized. This group would eventually give rise to birds. In fact, birds are theropods, living theropods, feathered dinosaurs that took to the air and survived the extinction that killed their terrestrial relatives. Argentinosaurus, from Argentina, may have weighed as much as 80 to 100 tons. Patagodaton, also from Argentina, similar size, Dreadnoughtus, with the most complete skeleton of any giant sauropod, provides us with better estimates. Perhaps 60 tons, but still unimaginably large. They were the largest land animals that have ever existed. Period. Nothing before, nothing since has matched their size, not even close. They represent the absolute upper limit, the maximum possible size for a terrestrial animal, given the constraints of gravity, of bone strength, of metabolism, of physics itself. How did they get so big? This is one of the most fascinating questions in paleontology. Because size, especially extreme size, comes with problems, challenges, costs that must be paid. So there must have been advantages, benefits that outweighed the costs. Several factors worked together, creating a perfect storm of adaptations that allowed sauropods to achieve gigantic size. Their specialized respiratory system was crucial. Sauropods had a respiratory system similar to modern birds, with air sacs extending throughout the body, even into the bones. This system allowed for continuous airflow through the lungs, meaning oxygen extraction could occur during both inhalation and exhalation, much more efficient than mammalian lungs, where air flows in and out of the same spaces. This efficient respiration allowed them to support massive metabolisms. Despite their size, their skeletal structure was optimized for size. Their bones were hollow, not solid, filled with air spaces connected to the respiratory system. This reduced weight while maintaining strength. Like the way modern aircraft use hollow beams and struts, the bones were structured for maximum strength to weight ratio, allowing them to support enormous mass without collapsing. Their long necks allowed them to access food sources other animals couldn't reach. They could browse the tops of tall trees, like living cranes. They could sweep their heads over a wide area without moving their bodies, minimizing energy expenditure. They could exploit food sources vertically, accessing different heights of vegetation, reducing competition. The warm, humid Jurassic climate provided abundant vegetation year-round. In most regions, food was plentiful, reliable. This is essential for large herbivores, which need enormous quantities of plant matter daily. In cooler or more seasonal climates, sauropods might not have been possible. The food supply wouldn't have been reliable enough. But size came with problems. Serious problems that had to be solved through adaptation, through evolution. How does an animal that big survive? How does it get enough food? A large sauropod likely had to eat almost constantly, consuming hundreds of pounds of vegetation daily, perhaps 400 to 500 kilograms, just to maintain its body weight. That's like eating a whole tree every day. They couldn't chew. Their teeth were relatively simple, peg-like or spoon, like designed for stripping vegetation, not grinding it. They just swallowed whole branches, leaves, whatever they could reach. They swallowed it down. They used gastroliths, stomach stones, deliberately swallowed rocks that sat in the stomach or gizzard. As food passed through, the stones would grind against it, helping to break it down mechanically. Like a living mill, many sauropod skeletons are found with smooth, polished stones nearby, stomach contents released when the animal died and decomposed. They probably had incredibly long digestive tracts with specialized bacterial colonies, microbiomes, that could break down tough plant fibers, cellulose, lignin, converting it into usable nutrients. This fermentation process, similar to what occurs in cow stomachs, would have produced enormous quantities of methane. Some scientists have calculated that sauropods, due to their abundance, might have contributed significantly to greenhouse gas concentrations in the Jurassic atmosphere and reproduction. How did creatures this large reproduce? They laid eggs, like all dinosaurs. But even large sauropods laid relatively small eggs, perhaps the size of footballs. Certainly nothing like proportional to adult size. This means sauropods went through extraordinary growth. From hatchlings weighing perhaps 10 kilograms to adults weighing 70,000 kilograms, a 7,000-fold increase. This is remarkable, extraordinary. It requires extremely rapid growth rates, perhaps gaining 5 kilograms per day during peak growth years. But the Jurassic wasn't just about giant herbivores. It was also about the predators that hunted them. The theropods. And during the Jurassic, theropods were evolving, diversifying, experimenting with different body plans, different hunting strategies, different sizes. Allosaurus, Perhaps the most famous Jurassic predator, the lion of the late Jurassic, reached lengths of 28 feet, about 8 to 9 meters, and weights of over 2 tons. With powerful jaws, sharp curved teeth, and massive claws on its hands. It was a formidable hunter, an apex predator in many North American and European ecosystems. But Allosaurus wasn't just large. It was sophisticated, advanced. Evidence suggests it may have been a social hunter, working in groups to bring down prey. Trackways show multiple individuals moving together. Bone beds contain individuals of different ages. This suggests family groups, or at least tolerance of conspecifics. Its skull was remarkable, engineered for delivering devastating bites. The upper jaw could flex, allowing it to open its mouth extremely wide to engulf large chunks of flesh. The teeth were blade-like, serrated, designed for slicing through meat and hide, not crushing bone. That strategy would come later with Tyrannosaurs. And the theropods weren't just getting larger. They were also getting smaller. This is important. This is where one of the most spectacular evolutionary transformations in Earth's history was beginning to unfold. Some theropod lineages were shrinking, becoming smaller, more gracile, developing longer arms, more specialized hands, and something else. Something that would change everything. They were developing feathers.
The feathered revolution, one of the most important discoveries in paleontology over the past few decades, has been this simple fact. Dinosaurs had feathers. Not all of them. Certainly, the giant sauropods were probably covered in scales or bare skin like elephants, but many theropods, especially the smaller ones, especially those related to birds, were covered in feathers, or feather-like structures. Protofeathers, filaments, pennaceous feathers, even complex asymmetric flight feathers. This discovery revolutionized our understanding of dinosaurs, of their appearance, their behavior, their physiology, their evolution. It changed everything. The first hint came from Archaeopteryx, discovered in Germany in 1861. This creature, dating to the late Jurassic, about 150 million years ago, was clearly a transitional form. It had teeth, sharp in its jaws, claws on its wings, 3-fingered hands, and a long bony tail, vertebra extending the full length, like a dinosaur, but it also had flight feathers. Asymmetric, aerodynamic. Like a bird, feathers preserved in exquisite detail in the fine-grained limestone of Solnhofen, where it was found, for over a century. Archaeopteryx stood alone. A bizarre outlier. A freak. An evolutionary dead end perhaps. Most scientists didn't think it represented a link between dinosaurs and birds. They thought it was just strange, but then starting in the 1990s. Paleontologists in China began discovering an extraordinary array of feathered dinosaurs. In the Yixing, Zhejiang, and other formations in Liaoning province. The preservation was spectacular, extraordinary. Volcanic ash had buried animals quickly, preserving soft tissues, feathers, skin, even stomach contents. Sinosauropteryx, Chinese lizard wing, was one of the first. A small theropod, about the size of a chicken, with simple filamentous protofeathers. Covering its body, like fur, but not fur. Clearly related to feathers, Caudipteryx had pennaceous feathers, complex feathers with a central shaft and branches, veins, like modern bird feathers. But it was clearly not a bird. It had teeth, a long bony tail. It couldn't fly. So what were the feathers for? Microraptor had 4 wings, long feathers on both its arms and legs, creating an arrangement unlike any modern bird. Perhaps it glided. Perhaps it flew in a unique way we can only imagine. Uranus, feathered tyrant, was a large tyrannosaur, 9 meters long, weighing over a ton. And it had feathers, simple filamentous feathers covering much of its body. A large predator, covered in feathers. This was unexpected, revolutionary. The list grew and grew. Dozens of species. Then hundreds. From China, Mongolia, other parts of the world. The evidence became overwhelming, incontrovertible. Many theropods had feathers. These discoveries revealed something profound. Feathers didn't evolve for flight. At least not initially. They evolved much earlier. In non-flying dinosaurs. For other purposes. What purposes? Probably multiple. Insulation. Keeping warm in cool conditions. Display. Showing off to mates. Intimidating rivals. Species recognition. Helping individuals recognize others of their own species. Perhaps, for brooding eggs. Sitting on nests. Keeping eggs warm. Like modern birds do, flight came later. Much later. As some lineages developed longer, more aerodynamic feathers, and the musculature to use them. The shoulder joints to allow the range of motion necessary for flapping flight. The keeled sternum, breastbone. Where flight muscles attach in modern birds, this raises a fascinating question. one that has profound implications. Were dinosaurs warm-blooded? Did they have high metabolic rates, like modern birds and mammals? Or were they ectothermic, cold-blooded? Like modern reptiles, the debate continues. But the evidence increasingly suggests that at least some dinosaurs, particularly the smaller theropods, the ones most closely related to birds, had metabolic rates much higher than modern reptiles, perhaps comparable to modern birds and mammals. Perhaps somewhere in between. Multiple lines of evidence support this. Bone histology. The microscopic structure of bones shows rapid growth rates in many dinosaurs, particularly theropods. Rapid growth requires high metabolism, high energy investment, isotope analysis of dinosaur bones, measuring ratios of different oxygen isotopes, suggests body temperatures higher than ambient, also indicating high metabolism. The presence of feathers themselves suggests endothermy, because feathers are primarily insulation. They trap heat, keep it from escaping. But this only makes sense if you're producing heat internally, generating heat through metabolism. A cold-blooded animal doesn't need insulation. It gets its heat from the environment. Think about what this means. Picture a velociraptor, not as the scaly monster from movies. Inaccurate, outdated, but as reality suggests. A feathered, potentially warm-blooded predator. More like a deadly ground-dwelling hawk than a giant lizard. With alert, intelligent eyes, quick movements, active metabolism. This completely changes how we understand these animals, and here's the crucial point. The revolutionary realization that changed paleontology forever. Birds are dinosaurs, not descendants of dinosaurs. Not things that evolved from dinosaurs. Birds are dinosaurs. Specifically, they are members of the theropod lineage. The Maniraptoran theropods. Close relatives of Velociraptor and Deinonychus. This means that dinosaurs didn't go extinct. Not entirely. Some of them, the avian theropods, survived the extinction event that killed their non-avian relatives. They're still with us. Flying, singing, thriving in every ecosystem on Earth. Every robin, every eagle, every hummingbird is a living dinosaur. A living link to the Mesozoic, Chapter 8, the Cretaceous, the peak of dinosaur diversity, the Cretaceous period. 145 to 66 million years ago. This was the longest period of the Mesozoic era. And it was the time when dinosaurs reached their absolute peak. Their zenith. The highest point of diversity. Ecological dominance, evolutionary innovation. This was dinosaurs at their best. At their most successful. At their most spectacular. The world continued to change. To evolve. The continents drifted further apart, South America and Africa separated completely. The South Atlantic Ocean widened. India broke away from Gondwana, beginning its long journey northward toward collision with Asia. The Atlantic Ocean continued to widen, pushing Europe and North America apart. Antarctica and Australia remained connected, but were drifting southward. Toward their current polar positions, sea levels rose to their highest points in Earth's history. Perhaps 200 meters higher than today. Shallow seas. Epicontinental seas covered large portions of the continents. The western interior seaway split North America in two. From the Arctic to the Gulf of Mexico. Shallow tropical seas covered much of Europe, parts of Africa. South America. These warm shallow waters, rich in nutrients, created incredibly productive marine ecosystems. The climate was warm. Very warm. Perhaps the warmest of the entire Mesozoic. There was no ice at the poles. None. Forests grew in Antarctica. In the Arctic. Crocodiles lived at 60 degrees north latitude. Palm trees grew in Alaska. It was a greenhouse world. Hot. Humid. With high atmospheric carbon dioxide. Perhaps 4 to 6 times modern leave. And something revolutionary happened in the plant world. Something that would transform ecosystems, change the rules of evolution, create entirely new ecological opportunities. Flowering plants appeared. Angiosperms. The group that includes most modern plants. Roses. Oak trees. Grasses. Orchids. They appeared in the early Cretaceous, about 130 million years ago, and rapidly diversified. Within 20 million years, they had become dominant in many ecosystems. Suddenly, there were flowers, fruits, and entirely new types of vegetation, different chemistry, different defenses, different nutritional value. This transformed ecosystems, providing new food sources, new habitats, new ecological opportunities. The coevolution between flowering plants and their pollinators, insects, eventually birds, drove rapid diversification in both groups, dinosaurs responded with an explosion of diversity. New forms. New adaptations. New ecological strategies. The Ornithischians. Previously less diverse than other groups. Radiated into numerous successful families, the hadrosaurs, or duck-billed dinosaurs, became the dominant herbivores in many ecosystems, especially in North America and Asia. These were large, commonly 8 to 12 meters long, social animals, living in herds. Some had elaborate crests on their heads, hollow chambers filled with air passages, connected to the nasal cavity. What were these crests for? Display. Certainly. Species recognition, communication. But also sound. The air passages in the crests could have been used to produce sounds. Low-frequency calls. Booming. Honking. Each species with its own distinctive call. Imagine walking through a Cretaceous forest and hearing the calls of hadrosaurs echoing through the trees, different species, different sounds. A Mesozoic symphony, the ceratopsians evolved and diversified. Horned dinosaurs, especially in North America and Asia. These were large, commonly 8 to 12 meters long. Social animals, living in herds. Some had elaborate crests on their heads, hollow chambers filled with air passages, connected to the nasal cavity. What were these crests for? Display. Certainly. Species recognition, communication. But also sound. The air passages in the crests could have been used to produce sounds. Low-frequency calls. Booming. Honking. Each species with its own distinctive call. Imagine walking through a Cretaceous forest and hearing the calls of hadrosaurs echoing through the trees, different species, different sounds. A Mesozoic symphony, the ceratopsians evolved and diversified. Horned dinosaurs like Triceratops, with their massive frills and horns. These weren't just for defense against predators, though they certainly helped. They were for combat, for display, for establishing dominance within the species. Male against male. Fighting for territory. For mates. For status. Fossil evidence shows healed wounds from horn fights. Broken horns that healed. Scarred frills. These animals were battling each other regularly, probably ritually, with established rules. Like modern bighorn sheep or elk, clashing horns. Pushing. Testing strength. Usually not fatal. But, occasionally, accidents happened. The ankylosaurs appeared. Living tanks covered in bony armor. Osteoderms, embedded in the skin, providing nearly complete protection. Some had spikes along their sides, spines protruding from their shoulders, and at the end of the tail, a massive club, formed from fused vertebrae and osteoderms, weighing hundreds of pounds. Capable of shattering bone, they were nearly invulnerable to predators. Slow. Yes. But protected, waddling through the landscape like prehistoric bulldozers. Probably browsing low vegetation. Ferns. Low shrubs. Their armor, their clubs, made them too dangerous, too risky for most predators to attack, and the theropods. They reached their zenith with the tyrannosaurs, the ultimate apex predators, the most famous of which is Tyrannosaurus rex, the most famous dinosaur of all. And for good reason. This was an apex predator, unlike any other. Before or since Tyrannosaurus rex. Tyrant lizard king. 40 feet long. 12 meters, 20 feet tall at the hips. 6 meters. 7 to 9 tons in weight. The largest accurately measured specimens, like Sioux, probably weighed 8,000 to 9,000 kilograms. With jaws that could exert more crushing force than any land animal before or since. Estimates range from 8,000 to 12,800 pounds. 35,000 to 57,000 newtons. Enough to crush bone, to pulverize vertebrae, to bite through the armor of ankylosaurs, teeth the size of bananas. The largest tooth from a T. rex, including the root, was 12 inches long, 30 centimeters. These teeth weren't blade-like, like most theropod teeth. They were thick, robust, cone-shaped, designed for crushing, for delivering bone-breaking bites, for gripping struggling prey and, not letting go, a sense of smell acute enough to detect prey from miles away. The olfactory bulbs, the parts of the brain devoted to smell, were enormous in T. rex, suggesting an incredibly sensitive nose. Perhaps better than any modern carnivore. It could smell carrion, blood, potential prey, from great distances, and despite its size, surprisingly fast. This has been debated, but biomechanical studies suggest speeds of 20 to 25 miles per hour, 30 to 40 kilometers per hour. Not extremely fast by modern standards, but fast enough to run down hadrosaurs and ceratopsians, which were even larger and slower. Recent research suggests that T. rex was even more formidable than we thought. Its teeth could puncture bone, drive through the thickest parts of skulls and vertebrae. We find bite marks on hadrosaur and ceratopsian fossils. Deep, crushing. Unmistakably from tyrannosaurs, its bite force exceeded that of any land animal ever measured. Modern crocodiles, even the massive saltwater crocodile, can't match it. Great white sharks don't come close. T. rex could bite down with enough force to crush a car it may have hunted in family groups. This is suggested by trackways showing multiple tyrannosaurs moving together, and by sites where multiple individuals, of different ages, are found together. not competing, but possibly cooperating, or at least tolerating each other. It possibly had excellent binocular vision, forward-facing eyes, overlapping fields of view, allowing depth perception, the ability to judge distance accurately, essential for a predator, for timing attacks, for pursuing prey through complex terrain, and it may have been covered, at least partially, in feathers. This is still debated. But other tyrannosaurs, like Yutyrannus from China, had feathers, and while T. rex was much larger and lived in warmer climates, it's possible that juveniles had feathers, that adults had partial covering, or that feathers were present in some populations, in some regions, but T. rex wasn't alone. The Cretaceous had numerous large predators. Each ecosystem, each continent, had its own apex predators, Giganotosaurus in South America, possibly larger than T. rex, though more lightly built, with blade-like teeth suited for slicing, rather than crushing. It hunted the largest sauropods, animals even bigger than T. rex, Carcharodontosaurus in Africa, shark-toothed lizard, similar size to T. rex, with teeth shaped like those of great white sharks, serrated, curved, perfect for cutting through flesh, Spinosaurus. Perhaps the most unusual large theropod, semi-aquatic, with a massive sail on its back, elongated skull like a crocodile, conical teeth suited for catching fish. It may have been even larger than T. rex in length, though more lightly built, spending much of its time in water, hunting fish and other aquatic prey. The oceans were dominated by marine reptiles, mosasaurs, massive predatory lizards, relatives of modern monitor lizards, that had returned to the sea, some reaching lengths of 50 feet, 15 meters or more. They were the apex predators of late Cretaceous seas, hunting fish, sharks, other marine reptiles, even occasionally seabirds. Plesiosaurs persisted, with their impossibly long necks. Some species with necks longer than their bodies. How they swam, how they fed, how they functioned with such bizarre body plans, is still debated. But they were successful, diverse, widespread, and in the skies. Pterosaurs reached their largest sizes ever. Quetzalcoatlus, named after the Aztec feathered serpent god, had a wingspan of 33 feet, 10 to 11 meters, about the size of a small airplane, the largest flying animal ever. It probably spent most of its time soaring, using thermals, hunting small animals on the ground when opportunities arose. Its size, its flight capabilities, are barely possible under Earth's gravity. It represents the absolute upper limit for a flying animal. This was the peak, the absolute zenith of the age of reptiles. Dinosaurs and their relatives dominated every ecosystem. On land, in the seas, in the air, They had been successful for over 160 million years. They seemed unstoppable, eternal. Invincible, they had no way of knowing. No way to predict. No way to prepare. That their world was about to end. That everything they had built, everything they had become, was about to be destroyed. In fire. In darkness. In the worst catastrophe in 135 million years, they had no way of knowing. That their world was about to end, the day the Mesozoic died in its aftermath. Chapter 9, The Asteroid Approaches, 66 million years ago. A Tuesday afternoon, if dinosaurs had calendars, the sun was shining over what would one day be called the Yucatan Peninsula. The shallow tropical sea was warm, crystal clear. Teeming with life, ammonites spiraled through the water, their chambered shells catching the light as they moved. Mosasaurs hunted below. Massive marine predators, some reaching lengths of 50 feet, cruising through the depths. Above, pterosaurs soared, their enormous wingspans casting shadows on the water below. On the nearby coast, hadrosaurs grazed in herds. Tyrannosaurus prowled the forests, Triceratops guarded their young. It was just another day, in an endless succession of days, that stretched back millions of years. No one was looking up. Why would they? The sky had always been safe, predictable, unchanging. For 160 million years, the sky had been the domain of pterosaurs and birds. Not danger. Not death, but something was there. A point of light, growing brighter. A celestial body, an asteroid, composed of carbonaceous chondrite. Rock and metal from the outer solar system. Beyond Jupiter. It had been traveling for eons. Pulled by gravity, deflected by the planets. Until finally, it found its target, Earth. The asteroid was massive. 6 miles in diameter. Think about that. 6 miles, the size of Mount Everest. Weighing approximately 1 trillion tons. It was moving at impossible speed. 45,000 miles per hour. 20 times faster than a bullet. 67 times the speed of sound. In the last few seconds, it would have been visible. A fireball streaking across the sky. Brighter than the sun, creating a sonic boom that would have been heard thousands of miles away. Animals near the impact site might have looked up. Might have seen this impossible thing. A second sun, falling from the sky. Growing larger, brighter. Louder. And then. Impact, Chapter 10, Impact, the first seconds, 10:52 a.m. Local time. The asteroid struck a shallow sea off the coast of what is now Mexico. The location would later be called Chicxulub, named after a small Mexican town nearby. The impact released energy equivalent to approximately 100 million megatons of TNT. More than 1 billion times the power of the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Combined, to put this in perspective. Imagine every nuclear weapon on Earth today, detonated simultaneously. That would be a tiny fraction of the energy released by this impact. This was violence on a scale incomprehensible to human experience. In an instant, the asteroid vaporized. Simply ceased to exist as a solid object. Along with it, the seawater beneath it, millions of gallons, and hundreds of cubic kilometers of rock. All converted to superheated gas, plasma, temperatures exceeding 10,000 degrees Celsius, in a fraction of a second. The explosion was so violent, so energetic, that it created a bubble of superhot gas, expanding at supersonic speeds. This fireball reached into space. Visible from the moon, if anyone had been there to see it, a crater began to form. The ground, solid rock, behaved like liquid, flowing, splashing upward. The impact penetrated through the Earth's crust, exposing the mantle below. It would eventually measure 180 kilometers across. That's 110 miles. Larger than the state of Connecticut. And 20 kilometers deep, deep enough to swallow Mount Everest, twice. The rock beneath the impact point liquefied. Then rebounded. Creating a temporary mountain in the center of the crater, 15 kilometers high. Higher than any mountain on Earth today. This peak rose in seconds, before collapsing, back down. The entire process. Like a slow-motion film of a droplet hitting water. Except this was solid rock. Moving like fluid, the shockwave from the impact traveled at supersonic speeds. Faster than sound could warn of its coming. Everything within a radius of 1,500 kilometers was obliterated instantly. Incinerated. Crushed. Vaporized. There was no escape, no survival. Just instantaneous annihilation. Every animal. Every plant. Every ecosystem within this radius. Gone. In seconds, beyond the immediate kill zone, a magnitude 10 to 11 earthquake rippled across the entire planet. In the modern world, a magnitude 9 earthquake causes catastrophic damage. A magnitude 10 is theoretically possible but has never been recorded. A magnitude 11 is beyond anything in human experience. This earthquake shook the entire planet. For hours, in the Cretaceous world, forests were flattened like grass. Trees hundreds of feet tall snapped like toothpicks. Landslides buried entire valleys. Mountains crumbled. The ground itself became liquid, moving in waves like water. Animals couldn't stand, couldn't run. They were thrown about like toys. And then came the ejecta. Trillions of tons of vaporized rock blasted into the atmosphere. Some of it traveled fast enough to escape Earth's atmosphere entirely. Ejected into space. Fragments of Earth scattered across the solar system. Some may have reached Mars. Venus. Still out there somewhere, pieces of the Cretaceous Earth, frozen in time. Some material fell back immediately. Within minutes. Huge chunks of molten rock, some the size of houses, crashed back to Earth. Within the Gulf of Mexico. In North America. Central America. But most was suspended, forming a cloud of debris that began to spread around the world. Carried by high altitude winds. Within hours. This cloud had circled the globe. Chapter 11, the first hours, tsunamis and firestorms. The impact had occurred in a shallow sea. About 100 meters deep. The asteroid had vaporized billions of tons of water. Displaced even more. This created a void. A massive hole in the ocean. And nature abhors a vacuum. Water rushed back. Creating a tsunami. Not just one, but a series of waves, each one hundreds of feet high. The first wave, scientists estimate, was over 1,500 feet tall. As high as a skyscraper. These waves radiated outward from Chicxulub, moving at the speed of a jet aircraft. 600 miles per hour. Within minutes. These tsunamis struck the coasts around the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean. The evidence is preserved in the geological record. Layers of jumbled sediment. Marine fossils mixed with terrestrial fossils. Dinosaur bones, found alongside shark teeth. Organisms from different environments. Thrown together by the violence of the waves, within hours. The tsunamis reached the Atlantic coast of North America. Water, traveling hundreds of miles inland. Sweeping away everything in its path, forests. Animals, entire ecosystems, washed away in an instant. The Appalachian Mountains. Al. already ancient by the Cretaceous, were struck by walls of water hundreds of feet high. Evidence of these tsunamis has been found as far away as New Jersey, Texas, Alabama. Layers of impact debris mixed with marine fossils. This tells us the waves reached at least 2,000 kilometers from the impact site. Possibly further, but the tsunamis, devastating as they were only the beginning. The debris raining from the sky was creating a phenomenon unlike anything in Earth's history. The ejecta, heated to thousands of degrees, was falling back through the atmosphere. And as it fell, it created friction, heating the air, creating thermal radiation. Imagine billions of shooting stars, all at once, all over the world. The sky, glowing red, orange, white, like the inside of a furnace. This is called impact winter. But before the winter, there was fire. There was an infrared pulse from the superheated ejecta that radiated across the planet, any organism with direct line of sight to the sky. Any animal not underground, not underwater, not sheltered by rock, was exposed to this thermal radiation. The temperature spiked. In minutes, the surface of the earth became an oven, forests burst into flame. Dry vegetation exploded into fire. The heat was so intense that even underground burrows offered little protection unless they were deep. Computer models suggest that this thermal pulse raised air temperatures by 400 degrees Celsius in some areas. For several hours, anything combustible burned. Trees, plants, animals caught in the open, all ignited. The entire surface of the earth became a crematorium. The fires merged, creating firestorms, continent-sized conflagrations that consumed everything in their path. These weren't normal fires. These were firestorms, where the fires create their own weather, their own winds, pulling in oxygen, feeding on themselves, growing larger, hotter, more destructive. The smoke and soot from these fires rose into the atmosphere. Billions of tons of carbon, ash, particulates, adding to the already catastrophic levels of debris from the impact itself. The smoke columns reached into the stratosphere, where they spread, creating a shroud that began to block sunlight. Within 24 hours, approximately 75% of the Earth's surface was on fire. The Amazon rainforest burning, the conifer forests of North America burning, the vegetation of Asia, Africa, Europe, all burning. The smoke was so thick, the dust so pervasive, that sunlight couldn't penetrate. Noon became darker than midnight. The sky, once blue, turned black, red in places from the fires below, but mostly just black. The temperature, which had briefly spiked from the thermal pulse, began to plummet. Without sunlight, the Earth couldn't maintain its temperature. In weeks, the planet went